90% of Iraq's marshlands vanished in just 2 decades. But today, thousands of square kilometers are turning green again. Ancient waterways that gave birth to human civilization are flowing once more through a landscape that was deliberately turned into a desert. The Mesopotamian marshes, larger than Yellowstone National Park, are coming back to life. Rivers that once watered the Garden of Eden are being rebuilt from scratch. Keep watching, because you're about to discover how Iraq is resurrecting one of humanity's oldest ecosystems and bringing water back to a desert that should never have existed. Did you know that Iraq sits on the Tigris and Euphrates, the biblical rivers of Eden, where the Sumerians invented writing 5,000 years ago and built the world's first cities? For millennia, these rivers created the largest wetland ecosystem in the Middle East, the Mesopotamian marshes, spanning over 20,000 square kilometers of floating reed beds, channels, and lagoons. The Marsh Arabs lived here for 5,000 years in a completely unique culture, building floating houses from reeds, raising water buffalo, and navigating the waterways in wooden boats called mashufs. This was a living museum of ancient Mesopotamian life, unchanged for thousands of years. But in the 1990s, Saddam Hussein launched one of history's most devastating acts of ecological warfare. As punishment for uprisings after the Gulf War, his regime built 30 massive drainage canals and embankments, deliberately draining 90% of the marshes within a decade. What was once a thriving aquatic paradise became a toxic salt flat. 500,000 Marsh Arabs were displaced, forced to flee as their entire world dried up and blew away. Over 100,000 water buffalo died. Millions of migratory birds lost their critical stopover between Siberia and Africa. An entire ecosystem that had existed since the dawn of civilization was erased in less than 10 years. After Saddam's fall in 2003, local communities desperately broke through the berms and canals, allowing water to rush back in. For a brief moment, about 50% of the marshes recovered. People returned, buffalo herds grew again, and fish came back to waters that had been dust for a decade. But that joy soon turned into a new crisis. Upstream in Turkey and Iran, massive dam projects were choking off the water supply at the source. The Turkish Ilisu Dam alone, completed in 2020, cut the Tigris flow by 50%. Iran diverted water for its own drought-stricken Khuzestan province. By 2020, 40% of the restored marshes had dried up again. The harsh truth is that Iraq only controls about 30% of the water flowing in the Tigris and Euphrates. Turkey controls the headwaters and has built 22 major dams as part of its southeastern Anatolia project. Iran diverts tributaries before they reach Iraq. Iraq has begged both countries for binding water-sharing treaties, but none exist. Both Turkey and Iran face their own water crises and prioritize their farms and cities over Iraqi marshes. Without guaranteed flows, every drop of water reaching southern Iraq is a gift that can be revoked at any moment. After 2003, various solutions were tried. Some communities rebuilt ancient irrigation canals, but without river water to fill them, they were useless ditches in the sand. Desalination was proposed for southern Iraq, but the costs were staggering. It takes enormous amounts of energy to desalinate water, and Iraq's infrastructure was shattered by decades of war. You can't water 20,000 square kilometers of marshland with desalinated seawater when your economy is 90% dependent on volatile oil exports. Traditional water conservation helped, but you can't conserve water that never arrives in the first place. Every solution treated the symptoms, not the disease. The rivers themselves were dying from upstream extraction and accelerating climate change. Iraq is the 5th most vulnerable country in the world to the climate crisis. Temperatures regularly hit 122 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. Extreme droughts between 2018 and 2022 were the worst in decades. Dust storms from dried-up marsh beds choked cities 100 miles away. The ancient cradle of civilization was becoming uninhabitable, and 40 million Iraqis were running out of water and options. But Iraq refused to let the marshes die. Starting in 2003 and accelerating dramatically after 2018, engineers, environmentalists, and Marsh Arab communities launched the largest wetland restoration project in human history. The vision was audacious: systematically restore the entire Mesopotamian marsh ecosystem across 20,000 square kilometers in southern Iraq, where the Tigris and Euphrates meet and create natural floodplains. Not just reflooding dried land, but rebuilding an entire aquatic civilization that supported 500,000 Marsh Arabs, 500,000 water buffalo, and millions of migratory birds. The engineering plan was massive. First, they had to breach and remove the 30 major drainage structures Saddam built. Massive concrete berms and canals designed to turn wetlands into desert. Explosives and excavators tore through these monuments to environmental destruction. Then came the rechanneling projects, redirecting water from the Tigris and Euphrates back into the ancient marsh basins through controlled gates and carefully designed canals. This wasn't about just flooding everything. They needed precise water control to maintain optimal marsh depths of 1 to 2 meters, deep enough for fish and reeds, shallow enough for buffalo to wade. Engineers built regulators and water control structures at strategic points, essentially creating a massive hydraulic management system for an ecosystem the size of Yellowstone National Park. They planted millions of native reed beds, the tall Phragmites australis that grows up to 20 feet high and forms dense floating islands. These reeds naturally filter water, provide shelter for fish, and give marsh Arabs the building material for their traditional homes and boats. The reeds also stabilize the marsh floor, preventing erosion and creating the complex maze of channels and lagoons that define the ecosystem. The numbers are staggering. Restoring the marshes requires approximately 15 billion cubic meters of water annually, roughly the same amount that flows over Niagara Falls in 4 months. So far, about 6,000 square kilometers have been successfully restored and are maintaining water levels year-round. That's larger than the entire state of Delaware. To put it in perspective, they're recreating an aquatic ecosystem comparable to restoring the entire Florida Everglades from scratch, but in one of the hottest, driest regions on Earth. Restoring water flow was just the beginning. To make the marshes functional and sustainable, Iraq had to build an entire support infrastructure from nothing. They constructed over 50 water control stations and gates to regulate flow, ensuring water reaches even the most distant areas. These aren't simple dams. They're sophisticated hydraulic structures with adjustable gates, measuring equipment, and monitoring systems that track water levels, salinity, and flow rates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The technology investment alone cost roughly $100 million. Satellite monitoring systems now track water coverage, vegetation growth, and seasonal changes across the entire marsh system. Water quality sensors measure salinity, temperature, and oxygen levels, providing real-time data to engineers who adjust flows accordingly. Biodiversity tracking systems monitor fish populations, bird migration patterns, and buffalo herd sizes, giving scientists concrete data on ecosystem recovery. This is precision environmental engineering on a scale never attempted before. For the returning marsh Arab communities, access infrastructure was critical. Engineers constructed floating roads and elevated wooden pathways that move with water levels, allowing people to navigate the restored wetlands without destroying the fragile reed beds. Agricultural support came next with the establishment of buffalo breeding centers to rebuild herds decimated by the drainages, fish hatcheries to repopulate native species like the binny and shabu, and reed harvesting facilities where communities can sustainably harvest building materials. This infrastructure alone required an estimated $200 million investment. Then there's ecotourism development. Iraq is positioning the restored marshes as the Venice of the Middle East, a unique destination where visitors can experience 5,000-year-old traditions in floating villages, watch millions of migratory birds, and witness one of the world's greatest environmental comeback stories. They've built guest houses in traditional marsh style, trained local guides, and installed wildlife observation platforms at key locations. 3 major research stations now host international scientists studying the restoration, turning Iraq into a global center for wetland ecology research. The engineering hurdles were immense. Decades of drainage had left toxic salt deposits in the soil. Reflooding without proper flushing created salty dead zones where nothing grew. Engineers had to carefully time water releases and measure salinity constantly, gradually leaching the salt away. They also faced a deadly problem: unexploded ordnance from the Iran-Iraq War, buried throughout the marsh beds. Clearing these required mine removal teams working in waist-deep water and mud, a slow, dangerous process that continues today. And all of this depends on coordinating water releases with Turkey and Iran, countries that control most of the river flow and have their own competing priorities. The economic transformation has been remarkable. The restored fishing industry now supports over 100,000 families, producing approximately 30,000 tons of fish annually, worth $150 million. Native species like binny, prized for its delicate flavor, are thriving again in waters that were dust 2 decades ago. Buffalo milk and dairy products generate an estimated $500 million per year in revenue. A single buffalo can produce 10 liters of high-fat milk daily, which marsh Arabs turn into cheese, yogurt, and ghee, sold throughout Iraq and exported to Gulf countries. Reed harvesting has revived a traditional $200 million industry. The tall marsh reeds are stronger and more flexible than many modern materials, perfect for construction, handicrafts, and even paper production. Marsh Arab artisans weave reeds into intricate baskets, mats, and decorative items that sell in markets across the Middle East. The reeds also provide animal fodder during droughts when other feed is scarce. This ancient industry employs tens of thousands and requires zero fossil fuels, just human skill passed down through generations. Jobs have exploded. Direct employment for 250,000 people in fishing, farming, and tourism, plus hundreds of thousands of indirect jobs in processing, transportation, and trade. Young marsh Arabs who fled to cities as refugees are returning to rebuild their ancestral homes on floating reed platforms. Engineers from Baghdad work alongside communities to maintain water control structures. International researchers employ local guides and assistants. The marshes have become an economic engine for southern Iraq, one of the country's poorest and most neglected regions. Tourism projections are ambitious but increasingly realistic. If Iraq can stabilize security, the marshes could attract over 1 million tourists annually, generating $1 billion per year. Imagine floating through channels lined with 20-foot-tall reeds in traditional wooden boats, staying in reed guest houses, watching flocks of flamingos and pelicans darken the sky, eating fresh grilled fish caught that morning, and listening to marsh Arab elders tell stories their grandfathers told them. This is experiential tourism on a scale few places can match, and it's authentic, not manufactured for visitors. But the benefits go far beyond economics. The environmental impact is transformative. Restored wetlands create a massive cooling effect on the regional climate, reducing temperature extremes by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius locally. In a region where summer temperatures hit 50 degrees Celsius, that difference is life-changing. The marshes also act as a natural air conditioning system, increasing humidity and moderating the brutal desert heat for surrounding areas. Wetlands are carbon storage powerhouses, sequestering 3 to 5 times more carbon per hectare than forests. The Mesopotamian marshes, at their full extent, could store millions of tons of carbon annually in peat deposits and organic sediments. As the world desperately searches for carbon sinks to combat climate change, Iraq is accidentally building one of the largest natural carbon storage systems in the Middle East. The reeds themselves pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as they grow, locking it away in their roots and the marsh floor. The marshes also function as a massive natural water filtration system. Sediments, pollutants, and agricultural runoff settle in the slow-moving marsh waters, where reed roots and microorganisms break down contaminants. Water leaving the marshes is significantly cleaner than water entering, benefiting 5 million people living downstream who depend on these rivers for drinking water. It's a 20,000 square kilometer natural treatment plant that costs nothing to operate and improves with time. For biodiversity, the impact is staggering. Over 250 bird species depend on these marshes for survival, including endangered species like the Basra reed warbler, found nowhere else on Earth. The marshes are a critical stopover on the African-Eurasian flyway, where millions of birds rest and refuel during their exhausting migrations between breeding grounds in Siberia and wintering areas in East Africa. Without the Mesopotamian marshes, entire species could collapse. Restoring them has quite literally saved millions of birds from starvation. But here's where the story gets complicated. Iraq's economy is 90% dependent on oil exports, which swing wildly with global prices. When oil crashed in 2020, funding for marsh restoration dried up almost overnight. The $3 to $5 billion price tag over 20 years suddenly looked impossible when Iraq was struggling to pay government salaries. Marsh restoration competes with urgent needs like rebuilding cities destroyed by ISIS, constructing hospitals, improving schools, and repairing shattered infrastructure. Every dollar spent on marshes is a dollar not spent on something more immediately visible to voters. Long-term maintenance costs are brutal. Those 50 water control structures require constant operation, repair, and monitoring. Pumps break down, gates corrode, channels silt up. Engineers need salaries. Equipment needs replacement. Satellite monitoring systems need subscriptions. It's not a one-time project you build and forget. It's an ongoing commitment that Iraq's unstable budget may not be able to sustain if oil revenues collapse or political priorities shift. Tourism revenue projections of $1 billion per year are wildly given Iraq's ongoing security challenges, lack of hotel infrastructure, and international reputation as a conflict zone. Then there's the fundamental paradox. Reflooding the marshes requires 15 billion cubic meters of water annually that's desperately needed elsewhere in Iraq. Farmers need water for wheat and rice. Cities need drinking water for 40 million people. Iraq's own water crisis is intensifying. Every drop sent to the marshes is water denied to agriculture or urban populations. When droughts hit, as they did from 2018 to 2022, political pressure explodes to redirect marsh water to farms and cities. How do you justify watering reeds when people are thirsty? The most terrifying vulnerability is upstream dependency. Turkey and Iran control roughly 70% of the water flowing into Iraq. They can turn off the taps anytime, and there's nothing Iraq can do about it. The Turkish Ilisu Dam reduced Tigris flow by 50% the moment it became operational. Iran diverts entire tributaries before they cross the border. Both countries face their own severe water crises driven by population growth, agricultural expansion, and climate change. They're building more dams, not fewer. Iraq's marshes are at the end of the line, and they get whatever's left after Turkey, and Iran take what they want. Decades of drainage left another problem: toxic salt accumulation. When marshes dry out, salts from the water crystallize in the soil. Reflooding without carefully managing the process creates salty, sterile dead zones, where nothing grows. Iraq has to constantly monitor salinity levels and flush problem areas with fresh water, a slow, expensive process that requires even more water from rivers that are already running low. Some areas may be permanently damaged, too salty to support life even with continuous fresh water flow. Climate change is accelerating everything. Rising temperatures increase evaporation rates dramatically. A marsh that needs 15 billion cubic meters today might need 20 billion cubic meters in a decade just to maintain the same water levels. Every degree of warming means more water lost to the air, water that must be replaced from rivers that are shrinking. The same climate crisis that makes the marshes more valuable as carbon sinks also threatens to kill them through evaporation. Water scarcity is already causing tensions that could explode into conflict. Iraq's desperate need for marsh water heightens pressure on Turkey and Iran, who see Iraqi demands as threats to their own food and water security. Turkey argues it needs every drop for its southeastern Anatolia project, which aims to make Turkey agriculturally self-sufficient. Iran claims its own Khuzestan province is suffering from drought and can't spare water for Iraqi swamps. Neither country sees Iraq's environmental restoration as their problem to solve. Inside Iraq, conflicts are escalating. Farmers whose families settled on drained marshland don't want to give up their fields to reflooding. Some areas have been farmland for 30 years. Moving those families again means displacing people who already lost everything once. Tribal conflicts over water rights and land ownership are intensifying, sometimes violently. Different marsh Arab clans dispute who controls specific channels and fishing areas. In a region awash in weapons after decades of war, these disputes can turn deadly quickly. Political instability threatens everything. Marsh restoration has been championed by specific political factions. If those factions lose power, the next government might see the marshes as a waste of resources and simply stop maintaining the water control structures. Iraq's government has changed dramatically multiple times since 2003. There's no guarantee future leaders will share the same environmental priorities. The marshes could become a political football, reflooded and drained depending on who's in power. Security risks are real. The remote, difficult-to-access marsh areas have historically been hideouts for militants and smugglers. ISIS remnants, militias, and criminal gangs could use the restored marshes the same way. Tracking and policing thousands of square kilometers of interconnected waterways and reed beds is nearly impossible. The Iraqi military has limited patrol boats and no tradition of marsh warfare. The marshes could become a security liability if not properly monitored. So what's the reality on the ground? Approximately 50 to 60% of the original marshes have water again. About 9,000 to 12,000 square kilometers out of the 20,000 square kilometer target. Major reflooding has been achieved in the Central Marshes and Hammer Marshes, the two largest systems. The Al-Hawizeh marshes along the Iranian border are still struggling because Iran controls much of the water flow and isn't releasing enough. 20 water control structures are operational, though many are basic and desperately need upgrades to modern standards. The period from 2018 to 2022 was brutal. Severe droughts caused by upstream dams and climate change dried out 40% of the restored areas. Satellite images showed green turning back to brown. Communities that had returned were forced to leave again. Water buffalo died by the thousands. Fish populations collapsed. It looked like the entire restoration was failing. Then, in 2023, heavy rains provided temporary relief, and water levels partially recovered. But the situation remains unstable, fluctuating with each year's rainfall and whatever water Turkey and Iran decide to release. The completion of Turkey's Ilisu Dam in 2020 was a turning point. Tigris. Flow dropped by 50% almost overnight. Iraqi engineers watched helplessly as water levels in the northern marshes fell month after month. There was nothing they could do. They don't control the dam. They can't force Turkey to release more water. They're entirely dependent on Turkish goodwill. And Turkey has its own priorities. Political fights continue to rage. Baghdad and local governments argue constantly over water allocation. Should limited water go to marshes or to wheat farms? To buffalo herders or to cities? Every decision creates winners and losers. And in Iraq's fractured political system, compromises are rare. Tribal disputes over who controls marsh water and land rights frequently turn violent. Different clans claim ancestral rights to specific areas. And with no clear legal framework, disputes are often settled by force or political connections rather than law. International reaction has been mixed. UNESCO designated the restored marshes as a World Heritage Site in 2016, recognizing their cultural and environmental significance and providing $10 million in aid. Italy and Japan have funded water treatment facilities and monitoring systems, contributing $150 million combined. UN agencies provide technical assistance and biodiversity monitoring. Environmental NGOs, particularly Nature Iraq, have been on the ground leading restoration efforts, working directly with marsh Arab communities and coordinating with government agencies. But some countries see Iraq's marsh restoration as a threat. Turkey views Iraqi demands for more Tigris and Euphrates water as threatening their own southeastern Anatolia project, which depends on 22 dams controlling those rivers. Every cubic meter sent to Iraqi marshes is water Turkey can't use for its farms and cities. Turkey argues it faces water scarcity too, and can't prioritize foreign environmental projects over feeding its own people. Iran takes a similar stance, diverting water for its drought-stricken Khuzestan province and refusing to sign binding water-sharing agreements. Iran points out it faces its own environmental disasters, like the drying of Lake Urmia, and can't spare water for Iraq's marshes. Kuwait has expressed concerns that restored marshes near their border will harbor mosquitoes and disease, though these complaints carry less weight. Both Turkey and Iran fundamentally believe Iraq's environmental goals shouldn't override their own water security. The global implications are enormous. The Mesopotamian marshes are a test case for ecosystem restoration in conflict zones. If this succeeds, it proves that even deliberately destroyed environments can be brought back with enough determination and resources. If it fails, it sends a chilling message that ecological collapse is irreversible once it reaches a certain point. The project is also a bellwether for Middle East water wars. If Iraq can't secure water rights for environmental restoration, regional conflicts over rivers will only intensify as climate change accelerates. The marshes are alive again, for now. Reed beds stretch to the horizon. Water buffalo wade through channels. Fish spawn in the shallows. And marsh Arab families are rebuilding their floating homes. But everything depends on rivers controlled by countries that don't share Iraq's priorities, and a climate that's only getting hotter and drier. The Tigris and Euphrates are at historic lows. Upstream dams multiply every year. Climate models predict worsening droughts across the entire region. Will the rivers of Eden flow permanently again? Or will this be remembered as humanity's last glimpse of a paradise we destroyed twice? Are we witnessing the greatest environmental comeback story of the 21st century? Or just delaying the inevitable while pretending we can reverse the climate crisis and regional water conflicts that are killing these ancient rivers? The marshes survived 5,000 years of human civilization, but can they survive what we've become? What do you think? Can Iraq save these ancient waters? Or is this restoration doomed without a binding regional water treaty that Turkey and Iran will never sign? Is environmental restoration possible when the fundamental resources are controlled by others who face their own existential crises? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts so we can discuss together. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more incredible and surprising stories about how humans are using technology and engineering to overcome nature's challenges, or learning hard lessons when we can't.